Hey everyone, Mr. Jeffersonian here, and if you haven't heard about Anchor, let me explain. It's the easiest way to make a podcast. First off, it's free, and who doesn't like that? There are creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer, and Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and many more. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast all in one place. So the call to action is download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Howdy everyone, and thank you again for tuning in to the Jeffersonian Tradition. Before we get started, I have a couple of things to go over. For now, the podcast is mostly ad-free, and I sure would like to keep it that way. You can help me out with that by becoming a supporting listener. If you find value in the podcast, there's a link in the show notes page that will enable you to contribute to my work and to help keep the podcast going and keep it light on advertising. Contributions start as low as 99 cents per month, with two other brackets at $4.99 per month or $9.99 per month. If you're not comfortable with a recurring contribution model, I've also set up a Cash App profile for the show. One-time contributions can be sent through Cash App to the show's cash tag, which is $ Mr. Jeffersonian, and all of this information will be listed in the show notes page as well. Any contribution amounts help, and thank you in advance to anyone who chooses to pitch in. And if you like the show, then please be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications for it. We are now available on all major podcast platforms. And to help the show grow, make sure to share it with your friends and family. In other show-related news, if there's a topic you'd like for me to cover, or if you just have general questions for me, I can be contacted at the show's email address, which is mrjeffersonian@outlook.com, or through the show's MeWe group, which is also titled The Jeffersonian Tradition. And if you're not on MeWe yet, then seriously, what are you waiting for? Unlike a certain other social media platform, MeWe respects the right to free speech and offers a privacy bill of rights. So if you'd like to be a member there, then download the MeWe app and search for me at the username Mr. Jeffersonian. The show group is private, so we must be contacts before I can send you the group invite. If you're not familiar with MeWe's platform, contacts are the same as being friends on Facebook. With all of that fun stuff out of the way, let's now turn our attention to the topic for today's episode. So today we're going to go ahead and wrap up our trilogy on high-speed passenger rail in the United States. I know it took a few days longer than normal for this episode to come out. Hopefully you guys find that it was worth it, because I had to put a ton of research into this one. And also, honestly, I wasn't really feeling well the last couple of days. I did a caffeine detox and I was having some pretty gnarly headaches. But all that out of the way, let's go ahead. We'll get started. So just a quick recap of our previous episode. We looked at a California train to nowhere that's been a 13-year disaster. Hawaii saw the cost of its government-sponsored high-speed debacle more than triple. The United Kingdom won't be able to finish its construction of the government-sponsored high-speed 2 until sometime between 2035 and 2040 at the earliest, and its costs have more than tripled, actually almost quadrupled. And then the nationalized AVE high-speed rail network in Spain is becoming a financial black hole that their government is hell-bent on pouring billions more into with no hope for economic returns. However, despite all these horrible failures, there is a case for hope. As mentioned in the first two episodes, I am a fan of trains. I do. I like trains. It's just something about the choo-choo that I like. It brings back a lot of nostalgia. So, what is the case for hope? In 2012, Florida East Coast Industries announced plans to operate passenger rail service between Miami and Orlando. Construction costs were estimated to be $3 billion for the full route. In March of 2013, All Aboard Florida applied and was approved for $1.75 billion in private activity bonds. Private activity bonds slightly blur the line between private and public financing. They are a type of municipal bond that can be used for special projects, And qualified bonds of this nature are allowed to provide tax-free income for the bondholders. So if I understand this correctly, the company is essentially borrowing the money from the cities, but the company remains solely responsible for repayment of all debts incurred under this financing agreement. And if it goes belly up, the investors lose out. It's not the city or the taxpayers that lose out. It's the investors in the company. The alternate type of financing for this project would have been for All Aboard Florida to offer corporate bonds, and those would not have offered the same tax benefits to investors. So if we want to be extremely meticulous, it's not truly 100% private, but it's also not being funded by a specific tax. And again, the taxpayers will not be on the hook for this if it fails. It's going to be the investors who purchase the bonds and the company itself. Well, I guess that is, as long as the state didn't try to bail it out, which I hope and pray they wouldn't, but who knows. So thus, Brightline was born. And Brightline is a mostly privately owned and operated train that is trying to establish itself as the go-to travel method between Miami and West Palm Beach in Florida for Phase 1. By the end of 2022 or early 2023, it hopes to begin operation of Phase 2, which will extend the route to Orlando. And at some point, it wants to expand from Orlando to Tampa for Phase 3. Brightline has also reached an agreement to have a terminal that runs directly from Miami to Disney, so it would go from Miami, Orlando, boom, over to Disney. And Brightline thinks this will be its primary money line because if people fly into Miami, tourists, they can get all the tourist traffic or a significant portion of the tourist traffic, and then they can just get the regular native traffic. Maybe people just want to go from Miami up to Disney if they've never been before, so on and so forth. So they think eventually that's going to be their primary money-making line. Now, Brightline is not a true high-speed rail system, and again, they would have to reach at least 155 miles per hour sustained speed for them to be considered such. So they're not a true high-speed rail system, but it does have an average speed of 79 miles per hour along Phase 1 of its route, and it's able to complete the commute from Miami to West Palm Beach in approximately an hour and 15 minutes, sometimes a little bit less. Now, from what I've been able to gather from asking people who live in Florida, that drive along I-95 is absolutely torturous, and because of traffic jams, it usually takes 2 hours, if not longer. In some extreme cases, it may even take up to about 4 or 5 hours. Now, as a quick defense of Brightline speed limitations, I want to make something clear here. Brightline has a lot of detractors, right? If you go on the internet and look at YouTube videos for it, read articles that allow comments, there are a lot of people who are just bashing the train for only going 79 miles per hour. But that's really not Brightline's fault. It's not that the train physically cannot achieve that speed. It's actually that the train was artificially limited to that speed by the municipal areas that it runs through, because it has an incredibly high number of crossings along the route. Actually, I think it has something like 110 traffic crossings on a roughly 70-mile stretch, or 67 or so mile stretch, 66. So in the future, they do hope to be able to increase that operating speed to at least 100 miles per hour. But again, for right now, it's more so that the cities don't want them going any faster than that. And Brightline has gotten some negative press. I think this is government propaganda more than anything. There's an NPR article that talks about Brightline being the, quote, most deadly train in America, but then you read it and it's like, oh, they've killed 76 people in 3 years. That's, barely, that's 25 deaths per year. And most of those, the people seem to have been wanting to commit suicide by train from what I've read, or people were trying to cross the railroad crossing arms, and Brightline actually has not been found at fault in any of those wrecks, so keep that in mind. Now, unlike its publicly owned and financed counterparts, Brightline actually does exist and began offering rides on Phase 1 of the route in January of 2018. And just take a moment to let that soak in. Financing plans were approved in 2013, and the train was offering service within 5 years. Contrast that with the California Train to Nowhere, which was approved in 2008 and will not be offering service at any point prior to 2033, according to projections from the California High-Speed Rail Authority. So that's not the only difference in these two experiments, as we're going to break down some cost differences in terms of construction. So as mentioned earlier, Phase 1 of Brightline service was built for about $1.75 billion. This is a 66-mile long track, so the per mile cost is $26.5 million. That's still a lot of money. But compare that to the Honolulu boondoggle that we discussed last week, which has an expected per mile cost of $550 million. Now, granted, I don't know the terrain challenges that will be faced in Hawaii, other than that line will be fully elevated, so all 20 miles of it will be fully elevated. But this is still an inexcusable difference in cost. The primary difference here is that Brightline has investors that they are accountable to, whereas the Honolulu train is a state-sponsored project, so the state can pretty much piss away all the money it wants and nothing will be done about it. The Hawaii train has also been pending operation since late 2005, so that one's going on 16 years now of planning, and it's still not in service. Now, passengers aboard Brightline trains seem to thoroughly enjoy the experience, so I watched several YouTube videos on this, watched people break down the financial aspect of it, but I also watched people who had actually taken a ride on the train and gave their thoughts on it. So the cars offer extremely spacious seats. The seats are primarily, they're 2x2, so you are, well, I say 2x2, so you got two trains on one side of the, or I'm sorry, not two trains, two seats on one side of the aisle, and two seats on the other side of the aisle. And then there are some where they have like bench type seats that can seat a few more people, but they have spacious seating. They have Wi-Fi, air conditioning, bike racks, overhead cargo storage, and large bathrooms for what it is. The cars are also based on the sleekest German designs, and they are manufactured in America. If you care about that, they're manufactured at the Siemens plant in Sacramento, California. So there's a lot of positive stuff about this train. It is creating American jobs. It's creating at least some level of American prosperity. I assume those are pretty well-paying jobs because manufacturing jobs normally are. But they're sourcing everything here in the country as far as the labor to build the cars. I'm honestly not sure about the raw materials. I couldn't find anything on that. But the cars are being constructed here in the States. They're being built in California, and then they're being shipped over to Florida by rail. So it's pretty impressive what they've been able to accomplish so far. Now, let's talk about some operational results, because obviously I can sit here and talk about how great the train is all day long, but if it's not making money, it's not going to stay in business. So let's take a look at that. So Brightline suspended ridership in early 2020, and as of the time of this recording, it still has not resumed service. However, they are expecting to be back to full service by the close of 2021. So with that in mind, the statistics that we're about to cover will be accurate as of December of 2019. And one other aside, the company expected to achieve annual ridership of 2.9 million by 2021 prior to the pandemic, and it considered its first 3 years as a ramp-up period for people to get acquainted with the service. So obviously they have to let people know that, hey, the service is here, it's functioning, like, come on, get on board. And the company began service with 5 train sets that have 4 passenger cars and 2 locomotives each. And with enough time and increased ridership, eventually they want to expand that to 10 train sets with 7 passenger cars and 2 locomotives each. Since they are operated completely privately, they can also offer flexible ticket pricing, which is a huge plus over the state set fares of public trains in terms of making sure the endeavor can be profitable. So that's a big problem, just real quick. That's a big problem with state-owned services is, generally speaking, the state sets the rate, and the company that they grant the monopoly has no say on that. And if they are changed, or if the rates are changed, they can only change it generally maybe like once every 1 to 3 years. So all that said, let's dig into their performance for the years that we have data for, which will be 2018 and 2019. So this next part is going to be a lot of numbers. I'm asking y'all, please don't go glassy-eyed on me. I promise I'll try to get through this efficiently, but I did just want to let you know what the picture looks like for them financially. So in 2018, quarter one, they had 107,567 passengers. They produced quarterly revenue of $768,000. The average ticket price was $7.13, but they had a quarterly loss of $30.14 million. And they have some huge expenses. We'll get to that when we do the annual summary here, but they had some huge expenses. Now, in quarter two of 2018, they had 106,090 passengers. Quarterly revenue was $1.5 million. The average ticket price was $12.85, but they had a quarterly loss of $26.2 million. Quarter three, 2018, 159,586 passengers. Quarterly revenue of $2.9 million. Average ticket price was $14.38, but they had a quarterly loss of $30.81 million. Quarter four, 2018, they had 238,749 passengers. Quarterly revenue was $4.7 million. Average ticket price was $15.16, and they had a quarterly loss of $29 million. So for all of 2018, they had a total ridership of 579,205 people. The average ticket price for the year was $13.45. Total revenue was $9.96 million. The train operating expenses was $78.25 million. The operating loss was $68.3 million. Total miscellaneous expenses was $7.78 million. So the company had a total net loss in 2018 of $116.22 million. That's a lot. So now for 2019, we're going to break it down the same way. So I'll give you guys a quarterly breakdown first, and then we'll do an annual summary. So quarter one, 2019, they had 244,178 passengers. Quarterly revenue was $5.8 million. The average ticket price was $22.23. They had a quarterly loss of $28.1 million. Quarter two, 2019, 237,142 passengers. Quarterly revenue of $5.2 million. Average ticket price was $16.65. Quarterly loss was $87.6 million. Now, I do want to touch on that. Part of the reason it was so huge there was that's actually when they really started construction on phase two. So that's going to be the route that extends it from West Palm Beach up to Orlando. So they did a lot of finance and stuff there. That's why that one's so large. Quarter three, 2019, they had 219,741 passengers. Quarterly revenue was $4.3 million. Average ticket price was $15.32. The quarterly loss was $38.5 million. Quarter four, 2019, 311,743 passengers. Quarterly revenue of $6.8 million. Average ticket price was $16.12, and the loss for the quarter was $34.65 million. So the 2019 summary. Total ridership was 1,012,804 passengers. The average ticket price for the year was $16.87. The total revenue for the company was $22.1 million. The train operating expense was $86.45 million. Operating loss was $107.88 million, and total miscellaneous expenses came up to $80.97 million. So the company's annual net loss there, as reported on their financial statement, was $188.85 million. So that's not great. And as we can see, this experiment is facing some massive, massive financial challenges in terms of being able to be profitable. They have lost over $305 million in 2 full years of operation, and at least as of right now, their revenues are just nowhere close to matching their expenses. And honestly, without drastically increasing their ticket prices or without having a drastic uptick in the number of riders, I don't see how they can turn that large of a black hole around, or that large of a shortfall around. I also think that the company has taken on too much debt too fast, and I do personally wish that they would have held off on building phase two to Orlando until they saw whether or not phase one could ever be profitable. Primarily, I wish that because if this thing fails, our detractors, or people who support public investment, as they like to call it, they will just be waiting in the wings to go for the throat here and point out, oh, see, private companies can't do it. Private companies are no better than government-owned agencies, and at least with the government, this thing would have kept on providing service, so on and so forth. So I'm rooting for this thing because I don't want to hear that. I really don't. I mean, now, granted, obviously, we have all the counter arguments of, yes, but the government's extracting millions upon millions, if not billions of dollars from taxpayers to keep something going that financially probably shouldn't be. I just don't want to have that conversation to begin with. So I really am rooting for Brightline, but I'm going to be honest, as we just discussed, they have a major mountain to climb in terms of their debt to income levels. Now, all that being said, there are still investors willing to take the gamble on Brightline, and some of them with incredibly high stakes. Spearheaded by billionaire Richard Branson, the Virgin Company was supposed to invest an undisclosed amount to take on a minority stake in Brightline in exchange for the trains being rebranded as Virgin Trains USA. And additionally, Brightline was supposed to go public as a contingency of this funding. However, unfortunately, 2020 happened and Virgin was hit extremely hard, so they withheld their funding. And Brightline accordingly nullified the contract, and they remain privately held, but without the benefit of a huge influx of outside capital. So that's actually kind of funny, and there's a good YouTube video on this if y'all want to look more into this lawsuit, because Virgin is now suing Brightline for violation of contract. And it's kind of funny because Virgin didn't uphold their end of the bargain, so Brightline said, well, you know what, screw it, never mind. And they had already rebranded some of their trains and everything, and if you go look at some of the financial statements, it was all done under Virgin Trains and everything else, and Brightline just pulled that, and now they're just back solely to Brightline. But there are some other investors who are still in there. Brightline's ultimate parent company is actually a private equity firm called Fortress Investment Group, and they're still pouring billions of dollars into it. So hopefully, again, at some point they'll be able to get the financials to work out in terms of matching revenues to expenses, but for now we'll just have to wait and see. And so that'll wrap us up on the Brightline specific portion of this. However, I'm going to give y'all some lagniappe. So if you don't know what that means, in Louisiana, we sometimes offer a little lagniappe, which means a little something extra. I'm going to give y'all some lagniappe to go along with today's episode. So for my libertarian listeners, y'all are going to just love this, and I say that very sarcastically. So in addition to the financial challenges already noted, to secure the rights of the Phase 3 route to Tampa, the Florida DOT forced Brightline to agree to compensate the turnpike for lost toll revenue. Under this agreement, Brightline will also have to bear a pretty heavy burden, as they will be responsible for the following. So 1, they have to provide the financing to conduct a study that details toll revenue lost to the state and CFX. 2, they have to prepare a compensation plan for said lost toll revenue to the state. 3, they have to secure an agreement with state-owned Sunrail to cross their tracks. 4, they have to obtain a letter of support from the Greater Orlando Aviation Authority for the project. 5, they have to submit they have to submit design plans when they are 30, 60, and 90% complete. And Brightline was notified of these requirements on March 1st of this year, and they were only given until midsummer of this year to meet the obligations if they wanted approval on Phase 3, on the Phase 3 portion of their track. So that has to beg the question of why the state owns the toll roads. I have always personally loathed this concept because every state already charges gas taxes allegedly for the purpose of road construction and maintenance. And so this truly is the epitome of the government collecting its pound of flesh for anything that could be productive, and they are playing their part of the troll under the bridge extremely well. Also, the main argument in favor of passenger rail in every city where it's being considered is that it will relieve traffic congestion and reduce road maintenance cost over time. So again, you would think, hey, if the theory holds true, they're going to be saving the state a lot of money on construction costs. So why does the state need to charge Brightline for lost revenue on the toll road? What is the real motivation here? And obviously we know it so the government and their cronies can extract their ill-gotten gains from the taxpayers one way or another. So if people aren't going to pay the toll directly, then obviously Brightline's going to have to charge higher ticket prices in order to be able to compensate that state agency. So that's horribly corrupt in my opinion. So now for my number crunchers, here's your lagniappe. In addition to my previously stated fears about how fast Brightline has taken on so much debt, they have also bought out Express West in order to eventually develop a true high-speed rail connection from Las Vegas to Los Angeles. I could not find the cost of this buyout, but the new line would provide a connection to the dreaded train to nowhere that we discussed in the last episode. And if this line proves viable, Brightline also wants to eventually expand service to larger cities in Utah, Arizona, and Colorado as well. If their current timeframes are met, service along Phase 1, so the Las Vegas to Los Angeles of the Express West route, or the Brightline West route as it's being called now, will begin by the end of 2024 or early in 2025. So we'll see. I'm very concerned, again, about how much debt they're taking on for this. I'm assuming, even though I couldn't find an exact number, I'm assuming they had to pay millions, if not billions, to buy out Express West. That's been a troubled line. There have been actually a couple of private companies who have tried to make that route happen, and so far it's just not been viable. Most recently with Express West, they were actually going to use some Chinese trains, but the federal, I think it was the Federal Railroad Commission, if I'm remembering correctly, actually told them if they wanted to build it, they had to use trains that were manufactured in the U.S., and at that point, the company said, well, there's no way this is feasible. We can't get enough funding for it. And they sold it off to Brightline. So we'll see. Brightline has done an okay job, at least in terms of actually providing service in Florida so far. So we'll see. I'm very concerned about how much debt they're taking on to try to accomplish these tasks. All right. And then some lagniappe for my Texas listeners. Y'all may be presented with a very similar project soon. The Texas Central Railway plans to privately construct and operate a line that connects Dallas and Houston. Based on current data, approximately 50,000 Texans make this commute at least once per week, with 90% of that traffic going by car. This corridor is considered the perfect case study for high-speed rail, as it is flat and the route would only cover 242 miles, so it's too far to drive, too close to fly. Estimates project that this line could remove over 14,000 vehicles per day from I-45. Current commute time by car ranges from 3.5 up to 5.5 hours based on a report from the Texas DOT, but the train could cut that to a mere 90 minutes or perhaps even under 90 minutes, which would be pretty awesome. The company hopes to begin offering service by 2026, and this one is going to be funded in much the same way, private investment and private activity bonds. So this will be an interesting case study as well. So again, for Phase 1 of this one is going to connect Dallas and Houston, and I think that would be a really cool option to have, because I know when I lived in Texas, man, I couldn't stand going to Houston because of the traffic. Oh God, it was awful. Dallas, for as large of a city as it is, wasn't so bad, but I could not stand going to Houston. So if I lived there, I would definitely be tempted to take the train to get down to Houston if I had a reason to go there. And then just one last general tidbit for anybody who wants a good laugh. One of the articles I read for this episode is titled "The Train Only Libertarians Can Love," and it was from the Washington Monthly website. And in this article, the author basically disparages everything about Brightline while defending Amtrak just fiercely. I mean, this dude was like just total mark for Amtrak. And the funny thing is that he denigrates Brightline for not being true high-speed rail, but he chose to ignore this. But Amtrak, for the most part, actually operates at a noticeably lower average speed than what Brightline does. So, it's kind of pointless that the guy would even go there, because it's like, well, hey, your little love child, it's actually slower on average than Brightline by a pretty decent margin. Actually, it's anywhere from about 20 miles per hour slower on average, maybe on the faster end, about 15 miles slower in terms of miles per hour. So it's interesting that the author went there. And for Amtrak, the only part that's even close to getting to true high-speed requirements is the Northeast Corridor, which goes, I think it's New York to D.C., if I'm not mistaken. And Brightline's average ticket prices are also significantly lower than Amtrak's. But again, another fun fact that he chose to ignore. Brightline, as we discussed, their average ticket price is generally going to be under $20. Actually, in some cases, it's under $15. Whereas Amtrak, man, you're going to pay an arm and a leg if you want to take any sort of Amtrak train. And alrighty, we're going to go ahead and wrap it up here, but I did want to provide some context to a statement that I made in the second episode, so on the previous episode of this trilogy, just so we can all be on the same page when evaluating the viability of passenger rail service here in the United States. I stated that the conditions almost have to be so perfect as to be unrealistic. So what I meant by that is this. 1, the distance between the destinations generally needs to be between 100 to 600 miles. 2, the route needs to be at least partially elevated to avoid vehicle traffic disruption in most cases. 3, the route needs to be as straight as possible so the train can maintain the high rate of speed and not have to slow down to go around curves. 4, landowners must be adequately compensated if eminent domain has to be used, which almost inevitably will be the case. Don't mistake this as me supporting eminent domain because I don't, but if we have to use it, then landowners must be compensated for that fairly. And then 5, and last, at least for the strongest arguments that I've seen, stops need to be strictly limited. And preferably there needs to be at least one dedicated line for nonstop travel between major population centers. Unfortunately, in many cases, it seems the trade-off for getting approval for the project rests on an agreement by the rail company to place stations in smaller towns along the route that just economically don't make any sense. And alas, as we see again, politicians always have to get their slice of the pie on mega projects like this. So keep all of these considerations in mind if you're in an area where high-speed rail is being considered. Even if you're in the minority, don't be afraid to be vocal about the total failure of government to manage this type of project effectively or efficiently. And now you'll have some ammunition to show that private companies will take on this challenge if it makes financial sense to do so. Thank you so much again for tuning in, and I hope that y'all have thoroughly enjoyed this trilogy of episodes dedicated to high-speed passenger rail service in the U.S. Please remember, if you found value in the podcast, to consider contributing to the show. You can contribute on a recurring basis through the supporting listener link in the show notes page, or you can make a one-time contribution by using the show's Cash App information, which is also included in that show notes page. Any contribution amount helps, and thank you again to everyone in advance who decides to do so. Also, please consider downloading the MeWe app and joining the show's private group so we can have more sane discussion around historical and current political issues. And all right, with another episode in the books, thank you again for tuning in, and I'll talk to y'all next time.